Hello, I am Stephanie, and in today's video I will share with you the process of my latest painting, Traces. Now I will talk about the technique first and the materials I use, and later on I will discuss the importance of artistic exploration, experimentation, and also just being honest with yourself and your artwork. Also, quick note, my coloring book is finally out and has been out for 2 weeks. I had a few copies myself, but I sold out very quickly. I was completely unexpected, to be honest. So yeah, I'm really thankful for that. Just wanted to say it. It's been a lot of work, but it looks great, and so far people seemed really happy about it. And yeah, if you've already got a copy, thank you so much, and I hope you'll enjoy it. But now back to today's painting. Now, this painting is heavily inspired by traditional Japanese art. Now, I recently saw an exhibition of Japanese art in Japanese style, and in a rough nutshell, they often juxtapose a very textured, abstract background and a very detailed foreground. So it's a mixture of abstraction, but also, well, for me, botanical illustration, because that's what I was most inspired by, but they also do portraits and stuff like that. But of course, I was more attracted by anything nature related. Now, usually there's also not much depth of field and no or very little shadows. Now, I really like this because it's similar again to the approach of botanical illustration, where all the focus is on the subject, but with an added very interesting background. So of course I wanted to try this, and I started with a wash of granulating watercolors. I used a mixture of oxide black and ultramarine blue for that. Specifically, it's one of the super granulating paints from Schmincke, Galaxy Black. It's by far my favorite of the bunch, but you can mix it yourself. I reach for this one quite often, so I bought it again. I find it works great for smoke, rocks or shadows. I also used the paint spray from Isaro, as the mixture was close enough. They just add PB15 to it. And I was running low on the Galaxy Black at that point. Now I did 2 large washes on the paper, letting it fully dry between the washes. The paper I used was one from Fabriano called Soft, if I remember correctly, which is an in-between cold-pressed and hot-pressed paper. Textured, but not too much. Honestly, I bought this one kind of on a whim to try out because it was on sale, but it did work great for this painting, so I don't regret having it. It's 100% cotton too, but honestly I just work with 100% cotton anyway. I should also note that with huge washes like that, it's best not to tape them down, as it's going to make your paper buckle more. Unless you do the whole, soaking your paper wet, stretching it, then of course that's different. But honestly, I can never be bothered to do that myself. Once the background was fully dry, it was time to go in with the gouache. Now, the technique I chose is definitely challenging, as you can't pre-draw what you're going to paint on that background. You have to do it correctly and right away. The background just cannot be changed, so if you mess up anything you paint on top, you can't make it right again and it goes straight to the bin. So I did a small painting of this in my sketchbook and a sketch of what I wanted the composition to be like. So I wasn't unprepared. And to be honest, it's not the lily pads that were the most challenging, but rather the dragonflies and trash. Since I wasn't very confident I would pull it off, I only placed the lily pads over the paper, but didn't yet layer them until completion. I wanted to paint and draw the trash, and especially the dragonflies, first, as if I would mess those up, at least I would not have wasted too much of my time on those lily pads. For the trash, I picked an empty plastic bottle and painted it from life directly onto the paper, and I used white gouache for this. Now, in hindsight, I'm thinking maybe I should have done that with acrylic white ink. Might have been a better option, but at the same time I look at it and I think I kind of like how the lines are a little bit thicker and more transparent. It kind of works for plastic. Now, apart from the first plastic bottle, I used white acrylic ink to draw the rest of the trash and the dragonflies. The first dragonfly was really nerve-wracking for me. I was so afraid to mess it up that I had to build up courage for a good hour before starting. To make it easier for me, I first drew the dragonfly exactly how I wanted it in my sketchbook, so I knew exactly the shape and had a perfect reference just next to the painting. Now, if you're going to have a background like this that you cannot salvage, you really better come prepared. For the acrylic ink, I've used the one from Schmincke. It's called Aero. It's basically an acrylic ink for airbrushes. It is hands down the best acrylic ink I have tried so far. A close second to this one would be the Liquitex acrylic ink, which I think is not bad. But yeah, the one from Schmincke is really the best. It's really liquidy and it works like an ink. It's very nice. Very pigmented as well. Now I added a few drops of slow drying medium to the white ink, which gives me more time to focus on the lines and not stress about it. I think it also makes the ink a little bit more fluid. As usual, I grabbed a hard writing nib so the lines are thin and consistent in size. I do want to play around with line thickness at some point and more flexible nibs, but my comfort zone is the hard, unflexible writing nib. Besides, and honestly, flexible nibs would not have made much sense for this subject because I wanted to showcase how delicate dragonflies are here. Once I had successfully painted my first trash and dragonfly and I could finally breathe again, I was confident enough to paint some lily pads. And let's be honest, I also just needed something easy to work on after those two. Now, I just would like to add an important note about how I use the gouache. I don't use it straight from the tube as most people do, and I would say how you're supposed to do it. Because I personally find it too cumbersome and I just don't use gouache that way. It's so annoying in my mind that I just don't paint with gouache because of that. Now, a few months ago, I read an article on Jackson's blog and they have a really great series of artists' sketchbooks that I find super inspiring and I can only encourage you to check it out. And one of the artists used gouache in plein air. She explained that adding a few drops of Arabic gum to the gouache when squeezed out of the tube would let it dry without it cracking as much. And so that's what I did. I created a small palette with the gouache that I had and added a few drops of Arabic gum into each tiny pan and let it dry. And it honestly worked really well. When you work that way, the gouache really needs to be layered as you're not going to get as thick a consistency right away. It's not fresh gouache, so depending on your style, this might not be quite right up your alley. However, I'm very familiar with watercolors and I'm very used to layering my paint a lot. Pushing it slowly towards the vibrancy and opacity that I like is not much of a hassle because that's already how my brain tends to work. Maybe because I recently also learned how to paint with oils, I found that the fact that the gouache reactivates is a real bonus for me. Because then you can blend the gouache on the paper and create smooth transitions, and that was really a joy for me. You do want to use a spray of water to reactivate the paint a little, and it does need a little bit more effort to get the consistency that you want. It's really an in-between watercolor and gouache the way you work with it. But I find it overall more manageable to work that way, as it's more spontaneous and you can decide on a whim to work on gouache. The box I eventually put all of the gouache pans in is a mixture of wood on the outside and aluminium on the inside, and the gouache paints didn't really dry when the box was closed, which made the whole process even easier. I actually leave the paint box open when I know I'm not going to use the gouache for a longer time, just to make sure that the paint actually dries. I forgot to mention that I had a reference picture of lily pads that I took myself. and this photo was the starting point of this painting. Now, generally speaking, I prefer using references when painting or drawing, just because the result is more believable. We tend to forget the little details that make something more realistic, so having a picture is an excellent way to remember those. I take thousands of reference pictures of nature on my phone. The number is a little ridiculous, but I use them constantly. I believe two things are critical if you're interested in depicting the natural world. The first would be to practice drawing from life, as you can move around the subject and understand how something is built. You'll also improve your drawing skills faster. The second point is to take lots of pictures as reference, because you can't possibly draw everything from life first. Another thing to consider is to draw and paint your subject in your sketchbook first before implementing it into a final artwork. That way you can take the time to really grasp the exact shapes and colors and still make mistakes beforehand. This is especially useful when it's something you never really drew before. I do this with my sculptures as well. I draw the subject from all sides, so when I start to sculpt, I know what I'm doing. Now the key is to get whatever you want to depict into your head first, so when you start to work on it, you're less likely to make mistakes, or you can readjust more readily as you go. I admit I've been slightly resistant to sketchbooks for a long time, and only recently, a few years ago, embraced them. Sure, I've always had sketchbooks to dump in ideas and quick doodles for as long as I remember. However, I find that taking the time to actually study from life or pictures in a sketchbook is invaluable. It's not only satisfying, but also really helpful and made me grow as an artist. If you've been following my work for a while, it's no surprise to see me use or depict trash in my artwork. At the core of my work is the environmental impact of human activities, and trash is an easy, understandable subject to depict for that. The juxtaposition of man-made objects and nature is what makes all of my explorations somewhat coherent, at least I hope. Nature is generally taking over objects or trash in my work, often in a colorful, even playful way. I like when my work has some meaning attached to it, so this is something that is a priority for any artwork I start. But as an artist, I do like to explore new paths of artistic expression, and today's combination of granulating watercolors and gouache is certainly one. Unlike other painters, I am a sculptor at core, and I've spent most of my art career honing my sculpting skills. Drawing and painting are more recent interests of mine, maybe 3 or 4 years, and I'm often still a bit unsure in which direction, if any, I'd like to go. It's often a little scary to me to try out new things because you're never sure if you're going to manage them, if you're going to enjoy the process, if you're going to like the result, or if it's just going to be a dead end. And the longer you've been an artist, the scarier it gets, because you have built a reputation by now with a specific set of work, so trying anything new is really frightening. I had to learn it the hard way, but the only way to improve your art is to follow ideas to completion and judge them later. If you get inspired by something, have an idea, and do a little doodle in your sketchbook, it's a good indication that the idea is worth completing. It might be just a one-off, it might even not be that great, or it might turn into a series of work, or maybe it's going to open up a new direction in your work. You never know until you try. Thinking about an idea will bring you nowhere, as you need to bring them to life to be able to ponder about them. Another essential approach is honesty. I cannot stress that out enough. I see people copying other people's art all the time, and while this can be a fun, no-pressure way to unwind or spend an evening, or even a good way of learning about technique or composition, it is not going to push your art into any meaningful direction. To do art is to take risks and follow your own lead. You have to dig deep into yourself and exploit any little interest you have. Bring your vision to life, one thought after the other. And after years of practice, you'll do some interesting and unique art. Especially nowadays, it's easy to get swept up by trends, crushed by algorithms into directions that might bring you money, but not satisfaction. Being an artist is intrinsically a lonely career. I see it on YouTube all the time. One video about a Ghibli study turns into thousands of Ghibli studies. One loose floral watercolor class into thousands of loose watercolor florals. Suddenly everyone uses bold gouache strokes in their sketchbook. And pretty sketchbooks are also suddenly in everyone's videos. Don't get me wrong, I love Ghibli studios. I do sketchbooks as well, and I even used gouache in this video. The question is really that of intent and honesty. Are you doing this because you saw everyone else doing it? Or is it a personal exploration that comes out of personal interest? Don't get me wrong, staying true to yourself is not easy. And creating art just for fun needs to have a place in your life as well, especially in your sketchbook. Getting inspired by others' work is a part of being an artist too. But there's only so much of that you should focus your energy on. At the core, your only chance of creating anything meaningful is to have so much inspiring art that you can finally throw all of these out of the window and focus on your own vision. Look at others for techniques, look inside for the rest. I must admit, I wonder if today's painting isn't a bit too inspired by the Japanese style. It might also be because of the lily pads. I honestly don't know. Maybe it's really not that good. I think it looks nice. I enjoyed the process. I like the result. It's the first one I make like this, and the first time I really use gouache in a final artwork. So I would like to explore this idea further in future paintings, and maybe it's going to lead somewhere. Or maybe it's going to be a dead end. I don't know. And that's pretty much all I have to say for today. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you watched it until now, please leave a plant emoji in the comments. It makes me really happy to see those emojis and all your comments. I don't always reply to them very fast because I don't have the time, but I read them all and I try to reply to all the comments. I'm just really slow at doing that. It's also the last video of 2023, and I hope you're going to have some nice end of the year festivities. I honestly had a bit of an intense year with the coloring book, and even some tragic news that I just don't quite feel ready to discuss. So I'm looking forward to wrapping up this year and diving into the next one. I really hope you enjoyed your time with me today, and I hope to see you in my next video. Thank you again, and see you next time. Bye!